Hi singers, I'm Matthew Johnson, owner of Elite Singer, and today we're going to be working on finding your false full distortion, how to sing with grit. Now with any type of new sound that you're adding into your voice, it's helpful to understand the context, to have some examples in your ear as to the sound you're aiming for. It's going to make it easier to apply and easier to get more comfortable with overall. So I'm going to give you a rundown first of a few different bands, groups that use this type of false full distortion, and then after that, we're going to give you some exercises and strategies to find this type of sound so you can apply it into your own vocal quality. Now, you're going to mainly find this type of distortion in rock and metal styles, and it's also starting to bleed into a little bit of pop as well. So rock-wise, we're going to have Freddie Mercury use this sound a bunch, Bon Jovi, and then if we're leaning into a little bit of a heavier rock, we're looking at Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, and Soundgarden or Audioslave, Chris Cornell uses these sounds a ton. Then we move into metal styles, so we're going to hear this from Disturbed. One of my more recent obsessions, Symphony X, uses this a ton. And then in pop, we hear artists like Ed Sheeran starting to use this more and more. Benson Boone is another good example of this. And they use this type of sound to create intensity, this kind of shouty power in their sound to add more depth, to add more power into their quality that they want to use. It adds this emotional element to it that's really cool to listen to. Now, of course, these are just a few examples. There are a ton of bands out there that use this false full distortion. It's probably one of the more common vocal distortions, right next to vocal fry. I would say that those two are used pretty regularly when we're looking at rock, pop, and metal. So I recommend you listen to some of those artists and then ask yourself in your own words, how would you describe that sound? If you can put that into your own vocabulary, it's going to make it easier for you to experiment with the sound and find it on your own. Now, we got to talk about the elephant in the room because a lot of people say when we work on vocal distortions, it's a sound that can wreck your voice. It can blow your voice out. It can cause vocal damage, but that's a myth. With the right time and with the right practice, we're able to create these sounds safely and effectively. And there are bands out there that do entire sets. They go on for 2 hours plus using these sounds, and it does not blow out their voices. So I'm going to demonstrate this in my own voice. I'm going to use 3 Days Grace as an example of this. I hate everything about you. So if I add a little bit of grit to my sound, I hate everything about you. Now, I've been playing with that sound a lot, and I could do that all day. That feels very comfortable. Yes, it's an intense sound. Yes, it takes a little bit of effort, but it feels very comfortable, and it's something that I could do sustainably for long amounts of time just because I've been playing with it so much. That's our goal for you. So this video is going to focus on kind of the starting steps of getting this sound together, and then you can run on and play with this on your own to continue to build this fine-tuned coordination to make this sound. Now, what I want you to get used to the feeling of before we even distort is this feeling. Ha. So what I'm doing is I'm closing off my air, and I feel this restriction of breath. Ha. You might feel your abs tense, and that's okay. Give that a try, pause the video, and I want you to ask yourself, what are you feeling? What are you feeling in your breath? What are you feeling in your throat? What are you feeling in general as you're creating that sound? So give it a try and see how that feels. The way I would describe this in my own voice is that I feel a kind of locking down. I feel a little bit of tightness in my throat, blocking off the air. That's the type of feeling that I'm going to memorize. Now, you might use different words. You might feel something different. Whatever you feel is totally valid, and that's going to guide you into this more intense grit that we're going to be looking for you to do. So once you play with that a few times and you get very comfortable with that sensation of locking down, what's happening with my breath, the next step is going to be, let's see if we can put a little bit of air through that, a little bit of voice through that. So the first step, feel the lockdown. The second step, maintain that lockdown, and we're going to let a little bit of voice through. It's not going to be a pretty sound. Sorry about that. It's going to feel almost like you're lifting a heavy object, like you're going to the bathroom. It's not a very pretty sound. When we're transitioning into this grit, we want to avoid a couple of things. A couple of things that tend to happen for people who are just starting to get used to this distortion quality. One of them is, everything just totally falling apart. Or the second one is, nothing coming out at all. So if we aim for this blend of holding on just enough to keep that tightness while letting a tiny amount of that air flow through, you're going to start to get this gritty sound, this type of rumbling in your throat. That's the false full distortion that we're looking for. So what I would have you do is play with that a few times. See if you could find that balance of just a little bit of that distortion and keeping that lock down. And once again, ask yourself, what do you feel? What are you doing as you create that sound? Now, before we move to our next step, I do want to say this. As you're playing with this for the first few times, it is not uncommon to get a scratchy feeling in your throat, an uncomfortable feeling in your throat. The false folds are a mechanism of our coughing. So if something gets trapped in our throat and we got to clear it out, the false folds are part of making that happen to protect our airway. So by manipulating them in a way that they're not really used to, that can cause some discomfort. It's kind of the throat telling the brain, hey, there's something weird going on here. There's something stuck. We got to get it out. And that can lead to a little bit of a scratchiness because the body is telling you, oh no, something's wrong. We got to cough. That doesn't necessarily mean you're hurting your voice at all. And what I'd like to say is, if you're starting to feel that type of discomfort, just take a break. Try again later. Try again the next day. Don't push beyond that. That'll make sure that you're not blowing out your voice or overusing it. But just come back when your voice is feeling back to full health. And then you can start to play with it more and more again. As you go through that, you're going to find that it gets more comfortable. The body's going to get more used to this feeling. The grit is going to become more sustainable and just overall more comfortable and consistent. Then we can start to play with some really cool sounds with this distortion. So scratchiness is something that everybody experiences when they're first learning these distortions, or at least everybody that I met. So that's not a cause for alarm. That's part of the process. Just don't push beyond it and you will be completely fine. And if you are concerned, something that you could do is just a little bit of head voice right after you play with those distortions. So a lip bubble, or kind of a hooty sound, is going to stretch the vocal folds, loosen them up, and help to heal them up too, just in case they were pushed a little bit too far. So now that you've been playing with this, this might have taken you a couple of days now of playing with this distortion to get really comfortable with it. The next step is going to be putting it on higher pitches. Now, in general, with rock, metal, pop singing, false full distortion likes to be used from about an F4 up range-wise. Of course, there are exceptions to that, but that's usually where that distortion starts to come in. So we're going to call that the sweet spot. If we get you up to that F4, G4, A4, that's a good place to be for now until we continue to stretch that range and build that comfort in the distortion just a little bit more. So we have our feeling. Let's see if we could aim higher. So almost like you're calling out to somebody across the street. What does it feel like to stretch the voice and hold on to that distortion sound? Once again, it's probably going to feel a little bit uncomfortable the first few times you do it. But as you go and attempt this a few times each day, you'll notice that those higher notes become a little bit more comfortable. The grit becomes easier to sustain in general, and it's going to make it a lot more usable as you sing the music that you love. So we kind of have 3 steps of where we're going to pause for today, because I want you to get used to this first before we give you trickier stuff. If we go too fast, that can lead to instability. That could definitely lead to discomfort. And I don't want to push you too far when you're first playing with this. So the first step, memorize that feeling. That second step, let a little bit of voice through that feeling. And just get comfortable with that sound. The third step is seeing if you can add that to higher pitches. Now you'll notice that we haven't really started singing yet. We're just making sounds. That's a good way to make sure that we're not overthinking these sounds, and it's going to make it a little bit easier to add that comfortability of it and that sustainability a little bit sooner into the mix. Eventually we're going to talk about vowels. Eventually we're going to talk about consonants, singing in phrases of songs, bringing that range higher, but for now, this is just the first few steps to make sure that you're comfortable with this. Play with this. Let me know how it goes. Let me know in the comments, how are things feeling? If you are getting scratchy, what does that feel like? And I can help you through it. Don't be afraid to bring those questions, bring those realizations through about false full distortion. I would love to hear them. And then these are also really fun sounds to play with, but it's also very helpful to have a guide, a mentor, walking alongside you each step of the way. If you're someone who wants more guidance and more of my help in building this sound in your voice, take a look at the description below. At the link, I have private lesson slots available, I have a course, and I also have more free tips that you can use to get you to the right place here. So thank you so much for joining me today. Once again, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, comments, concerns. If this helped you out, consider sharing with a friend, and I will see you very soon for another singing video. Thanks so much, everybody.